Welcome back to the Campbell Tech channel, where we love to simplify complexity. Today, I'm going to show you how you can implement the Fluent Builder in Python. If you like these types of videos, please subscribe to our channel, and then you'll receive weekly videos on coding, design patterns, and software architecture. The Builder is a creational design pattern that enables you to separate the construction of a complex object from its representation. By utilizing the same construction process, the builder can be used to create different representations of an object. Now, at first glance, you might say, this is an entire overkill. Why can't we just instantiate an object and set its property values? That's a very good question, but let's look at a few advantages of using the builder pattern. Firstly, it encapsulates object construction logic. It provides a fluent interface for readable code. It supports step-by-step construction of objects. It gives you control over object creation and validation. It enhances code readability and maintainability. It enables creation of immutable objects. And last but not least, it facilitates easy creation of object variations. Now it's time to code the builder pattern in Python. I've simply opened a blank folder called Fluent Builder Python, and let's start by creating our virtual environment in VS Code. You can do it again by holding Ctrl, Shift, and P, and then you can type Python : create environment, but I've got it here in recently used, so I'm simply going to click it there. Then select your virtual environment for the current workspace. I'm going to select venv, and remember to select your interpreter. I'll use the global one again. Now, to start with the coding, we need to create the object that we are going to build first. So let's go ahead and create a new file and call it email_message. Let's mark this as our product class, the object that we are going to build. And then let's go ahead and define our class, call it email_message. And go ahead and define the init method, which again is Python's version of the constructor. Now, importantly, when you're using a builder, you want to discourage calling code from directly instantiating and setting the class's instance variables. And you would normally do that by making sure that the class itself controls how the values are retrieved and set. And you'll normally do that using private instance variables. Now, if you are an experienced Python developer, you'll probably tell me Python doesn't have the concept of access modifiers, and you are absolutely correct. However, we've got another approach that we can follow. So let's go ahead and look at the official Python documentation. And here you'll see that it says private instance variables that cannot be accessed except from inside an object don't exist in Python. So what are we to do? There is a convention that is followed by most Python code or Python developers where they prefix a name, a variable name, with an underscore, for example, _spam. Now that's exactly what we are going to do. In other words, if another developer looks at this code, they will see that our intent is for these instance variables to be private. So let's go ahead and create our private instance variables. Our first instance variable will be one for the from address. So say self._from, and it's going to be a string instance variable. Then we also need an instance variable for the to addresses, because they can be more than one, and therefore the type is a list. I'm going to copy this because we'll have several list instance variables. Amongst others, CC for carbon copy and BCC for blank carbon copy. Then also add an instance variable for the subject of the email. That'll be a string 2. And also one for the body of the email. And then our final instance variable that we need is one that will allow us to add one or more attachments. So self._attachments. And that'll be a list as mentioned. Okay, so now we have all of our instance variables. Now, like I mentioned, there's a very important point when you're using instance variables, and it's actually revealed in this first statement here. Private instance variables that cannot be accessed except from inside an object. And that's the point. When you have private instance variables, you actually want the class itself, in other words, our email message class, to control how these variables are set, as well as how they are used and retrieved. And that's where the concept of access modifiers in other languages come in. And we are going to try and mimic that. In Java, for example, you have the concept of getters and setters, in other words, methods that retrieves the current state of an object or the values of the instance variables, and the setter functions for setting the values of the instance variables. So let's go ahead and create setter methods for our from, subject, and body fields, because for the list fields we'll simply have getter methods where we'll return the value, and then the client code will, for example, say get to dot append and then add a to address to the list of addresses. So let's start by defining one for the from address. Say set underscore from, add a parameter for the from address of type string, and say self dot underscore from equals from address. Then we can go ahead and copy this for setting the subject. So say set underscore subject, and then subject underscore subject equals subject. And then another one for the body, the email body, set body pass a body parameter, and then self dot underscore body equals body. You might think, what on earth makes this better than manually setting the instance variables? And that's a very good question. Normally, you want to make sure that the class itself, in other words, the email class, controls how these fields are set. So you'll typically have some validation logic in here that makes sure that the from address is in the correct format using regex or something like that. Or you'll have other types of validation logic to ensure that a parameter value follows certain rules. Now, we are not going to add that validation in here. Instead, we want to keep it simple and zoom in on the pattern itself to ensure that you exactly know how to create a Fluent Builder in Python. Now we've got setter methods for all of our string instance variables. Let's add getters for our list fields. So let's start by defining a getter for our to list, get underscore to, and then it'll simply return the to instance variable. We can copy that for our other lists. We've got one for CC, and another for BCC, and return self dot underscore BCC. And then the last getter is for returning our attachments. Call it get underscore attachments, and then return self dot underscore attachments. Okay, and then finally, let's define our send method. The intention for this is to mimic sending an email, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're simply going to print out something to the console. We'll say email successfully sent, and then I'm going to underline that title or heading, and then let's also print out the values of each of our instance variables. So I'm going to format the print and say from, and then we'll print self dot underscore from, Let's do the same for the to addresses, self._to. Also for CC and BCC. Also for our subject line. Let's also print out the email body. And then finally, also print out the attachments. And that's really for us to see the values of each of these instance variables once the builder has constructed the email message object. Okay, so we have now completed the implementation of our email message class. Let's go ahead and create our builder class. So create a new file and call it email_builder.py. So first, let's go ahead and import the email message class because that's the object we will be building. So say from email_message, import the email message class. We'll mark it as our builder, and then we can say class email builder, define the init method, we'll treat our email message object that we are going to build as a private instance variable also. So say self._email message equals, and then instantiate the email message object. And then on the class diagram, you'll remember that I said we have methods that fall within two categories. Firstly, methods that fall within the add part, and then methods that fall within the build part, where you only have a single build method. So let's start with that build method because it's quite simple, and I always like to add that first. So we'll define a method called build, and it won't take in any specific arguments, and it will simply return the constructed email object. So say return self._email message. Okay, now for the add part methods. So let's define one for adding a from address. Let's call it add_from. Add an argument for the from address. It'll be of type string. And then we'll say self._email message. We'll use the setter for set from, passing the from address. And then very importantly, we need to return self. In other words, this instance of the email builder itself. And the reason for doing this is you'll see when we implement our director or client code that returning the builder itself provides us with the ability to construct our email object using this elegant Fluent Builder syntax. Then next, let's add a function for adding a to address to the list of to addresses. Call it add to. It'll take in a parameter called to of type string, only a single one at a time. Self._email message dot get to. So first we're retrieving the existing list, and then we are appending that to address to the list of to addresses. And then importantly, return self. Then let's copy this function for adding a CC field to the list of CC addresses. So add CC, get CC, and append a CC address to the list of CC addresses. We can copy that again. Do the same for BCC. Get BCC, append BCC. And then let's define one for setting the subject. So we'll call it with_subject. It'll have a subject argument of type string. and we'll say self dot underscore email message dot set subject, and we'll pass in the subject argument there. Return self. Copy that, and we'll have one called with body. We'll take in a body argument and change this to dot set body. And then the last function we need is one for adding an attachment. So we'll say add attachment one at a time. We'll say dot get attachments, and then we'll pass in the attachment there. Okay, so we have now successfully implemented our email builder. In the init method, Python's version of the constructor, we instantiate our email message object, our product class that we are building. We've got several methods in the add category, one for adding a from address, one for adding a to address to the list of to addresses, one for adding CC, BCC, adding the subject line of the email, adding the body, and adding an attachment. And then finally, we'll invoke the build method to return the constructed email object. So the last thing we need to do is to implement the director, and that is our client code. So go ahead and create a main Python file, and then import the email builder. So say from email builder, import email builder, and we'll define a main method and say email message, and then say equals email builder. And then with the Fluent Builder syntax, you would normally have all your add methods below each other, each on its own new line. And then lastly, you'll invoke the build method. And that provides you with that Fluent Elegance syntax. So for us to make that work, we can't simply say .add on the next line. It'll throw a compile error. But in Python, you can use curly brackets. So curly bracket on the first line, and then right at the end there, and then within the curly brackets, we can now say .add from, and we'll add a from address. Let's add info@campbelltech.io as the from address, and then we can say .add _to. Let's add two addresses. Firstly, john@gmail.com, and we can also add another to address, jane@yahoo.com. We can also add a CC if we like. Let's assume there was somebody called Jones working at Campbell Tech. So add CC, and then we'll say jones@campbelltech.io. Okay, and then also add a subject with subject. Let's add a subject, the builder pattern tutorial. And as our email body, we can say check out this awesome builder pattern tutorial, just to prove the concept. And then let's add an attachment, for example, builder pattern.pdf. And then finally, we need to invoke the build method to return the constructed email message object. And then once we've done that, let's invoke the send method on the email message object. Okay, and the final thing we need to do is to say if the name equals __main. In other words, the entry point to this application. So when we get that __main __ command, will invoke the main method. Okay, so let's go ahead and open the terminal and run this code. Say Python 3 and then main.py. And then as you can see there, here in the console, it says email successfully sent from info@campbelltech.io. We've got john@gmail.com and jane@yahoo.com as our two addresses, one CC address. We didn't set a BCC. The subject is the Builder Pattern tutorial. The body, check out this awesome Builder Pattern tutorial. And finally, we've got one attachment, builderpattern.pdf. So as you can see, it's extremely simple to implement a Fluent Builder in Python. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and like it and subscribe to our channel. Till next time.